12 Years a Slave is one of the few films that has brought me to tears. It's powerful and effective, and everybody should watch it at some point in their life. It dives headfirst into the depths of human depravity and lets us soak in it for 2 hours. 12 Years a Slave is the true story of Solomon Northup, a violinist who is offered a job as a traveling musician in D.C. Little does he know that the men who hired him have very sinister intentions. Though Solomon lives in a world where slavery exists, he kind of thinks of himself as immune. He's a free man, lives a good, respectable life with his family. He's well-spoken, literate, and plays an instrument. All of that changes when he wakes up drugged and chained underneath D.C., tricked by the men he so naively trusted. What makes this movie so different from other films about slavery is the way Steve McQueen depicts the dehumanization of Solomon. The men immediately attack his identity, stripping him of his clothes, his violin, telling him to admit that he's a runaway slave from Georgia, calling him Platt instead of Solomon, and even telling him to never read or write again. It's interesting to parallel what happened back then with Black identity to today. Who are we and where do we fit in this majorly white society? It's trying to reconcile the duality of being American and being Black, how this Black experience dictates our experience as an American, and how we can't divorce the two even if we'd like to. The film continues with Solomon being sold to a slave owner named Ford. Now, Ford isn't exactly a bad person. He kind of treats his slaves like human beings, I guess. He even gives Solomon a violin. At first, a more naive Solomon comments on this, trying to show his fellow slave that things could actually be worse and that their situation isn't that bad. It isn't until Paul Dano's character, a staff member of Ford, hangs him from the neck that he realizes just how grim his situation really is, that he actually has no control over his life. He even wrote later in the journal that the film is adapted from, and I quote, "There may be humane masters, as there certainly are inhumane ones. There may be slaves well-clothed, well-fed, and happy, as there surely are those half-clad, half-starved, and miserable. Nevertheless, the institution that tolerates such wrong and inhumanity as I have witnessed is a cruel, unjust, and barbarous one. Men may write fictions portraying lowly life as it is or as it is not, may talk with owlish gravity upon the bliss of ignorance, discourse flippantly from armchairs of the pleasures of slave life, but let them toil with him in the fields, sleep with him in the cabin, feed with him on husks, let him behold him scourged, hunted, and trampled on, and they will come back with another story in their mouths. Let them know the heart of the poor slave, learn his secret thoughts, thoughts he dare not utter in the hearing of the white man. Let them sit by him and in the silent watches of the night converse with him in trustful confidence of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And they will find that 99 out of every 100 are intelligent enough to understand their situation and to cherish in their bosoms the love of freedom as passionately as themselves." End quote. Another interesting aspect of Ford's character and a resounding theme in the film is Christianity. Ford is a pastor and is often shown preaching to his family, slaves, and staff. Both times they show this, though, there is always some kind of noise going on in the background, drowning out his voice. This reminds me of 1 Corinthians 13:1, which says, "If I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal." This is a form of Christian malpractice. Another form would be the misuse of scripture from Solomon's second owner, Epps. Now, Epps is one of the most disgusting, horrible, vomit-inducing characters I've ever seen on screen. All thanks to Michael Fassbender's marvelous performance. Epps is a perfect example of how not knowing how to rightly interpret the Bible in its context is extremely damaging and dangerous. He reads passages about slavery without proper hermeneutics and then uses them to justify his cruelty. He picks which verses he thinks apply to him, twists them so that they do, and then disregards the rest of the Bible. Epps is a person that enjoys making the lives of his slaves miserable. This aspect of his character is shown perfectly when he wakes them up in the middle of the night and forces them to dance in his house for entertainment. It is also seen in the way he interacts with the slaves, always touching them and invading their personal space like they're best friends. But Epps isn't just a terrible white guy with a power complex. He's more layered than that. Epps is in love with one of his slaves, a girl named Patsy. This may seem like a strange thing to say considering she is often the subject of his harsh wrath, but Fassbender himself has some interesting comments on this. Quote, "I think the real sort of crux for the character is his love for Patsy and his inability to handle that. Epps doesn't have the equipment or the intellect to process it or to allow himself to love her or to express himself. His expression we see in the rape scene. In one moment, he's almost pleading with her, and in the next, the door is shut and he's beating her. He's trying to destroy her in the hope of destroying that feeling inside." End quote. As demented as Epps is, what really sets us in this harsh world is the brilliant way Steve McQueen shoots the violence. Because violence is so prevalent in American films today, we can often become callous when watching it, even when the violence is based on true events. With 12 Years a Slave, McQueen doesn't allow us to be callous. The amount of time he spends on a singular violent shot forces us not to check out. It instead makes us really take in what is happening to Solomon and the slaves around him. The scene where Epps forces Solomon to whip Patsy for stealing a bar of soap is 4 minutes and 46 seconds long. Although most people would argue that this is the most brutal scene in the movie, I would argue that the scene where Solomon is hanging from the tree was the most impacting, at least for me. They focus on this shot for almost 3 minutes as children run and play in the background and people walk by. What stood out to me about this scene is how we as individuals do this every day. We see oppression going on and we do nothing to stop it. We close our eyes and act as if everything is okay. At the end of the film, Solomon is freed and returned to his family. This reunion is super hard to watch though, because when he sees them, they're totally different people. 12 years has passed and now he's a grandfather. We also can't help but think about all the slaves that weren't freed and what will happen to Patsy. I found out later after watching the film that Solomon actually went missing again 4 years later and that historians never even found out what happened to him. His tragic life shows us the brutality of racism in a heart-wrenching but important way. America has come a long, long way from where it was, but there is always room for improvement. While dwelling on the past and staying stuck in it will not fix racial problems, it is still important to remember and learn from them. I believe it is appropriate to end this dissection with another quote from Solomon's journal. Quote, "This is no fiction, no exaggeration. If I have failed in anything, it has been in presenting to the reader too prominently the bright side of the picture. I doubt not hundreds have been as unfortunate as myself, that hundreds of free citizens have been kidnapped and sold into slavery, and are at this moment wearing out their lives on plantations in Texas and Louisiana. But I forbear, chastened and subdued in spirit by the sufferings I have borne, and thankful to the good being through whose mercy I have been restored to happiness and liberty. I hope henceforth to lead an upright, though lowly life, and rest at last in the churchyard where my father sleeps." End quote. Thanks for watching, you guys, and please subscribe for more videos.